Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome Forrest Maltzma, Provost of the George Washington University.
Thank you. I am absolutely thrilled to be here. I am both the Provost of the George Washington University. I am also a political scientist. And in fact, the very first class I taught was for the George Washington University Graduate School of Political Management. It was presidential politics, political science. It was 216 was the course number. And ever since then, I have just continuously been impressed with both the students and the faculty of the Graduate School of Political Management. It is a group of people who are ambitious, who are committed, and who want to go ahead and change the world through our democratic processes. And when I think of all the challenges our nation has at this period of time, it is hard to imagine an institution that is serving a more noble purpose than they are. I'm also pleased to join you all tonight for what I am sure will be an interesting conversation on generational political leadership with our distinguished guests, former Congressman Connie MACK and former Lieutenant Governor of Maryland, Kathleen Kennedy Townsend. Since 1999, the generosity of Brian O'Dwyer and the O'Dwyer family has made this lecture series possible, and we are grateful for the opportunities it affords for discussions on political ethics and civility, themes that I think we can safely say always will be important here in Washington, D.C. Tonight's discussion also serves as a fitting start to GW's Reimagining Disruption 2018 Symposium, a series of events that explores the future of political communication. This year, we are also celebrating the 30th anniversary of our Graduate School of Political Management. During the past 3 decades, GSPM has grown as a leader in the field, and the success of its students, faculty, and alumni have continuously multiplied. With our location in the heart of the nation's capital, GSPM will always have a special role to play when it comes to educating the next generation of political and communications professionals. Thanks to the Paul O'Dwyer Lecture Series for Political Ethics, tonight's discussion is one important way GW can do this. And I look forward to hearing from the panelists soon. It is now my great pleasure to welcome to the stage Dr. Lara Brown, the Director of the Graduate School of Political Management and my colleague, and she will be the moderator for this evening.
So, welcome everyone. It's wonderful to be here this evening. I'm excited that we are kicking off the Reimagining Disruption Conference tonight. We have an extraordinary program, and I'm so very privileged to be here with the company that is in this room. If you don't know, there is our founding dean, Chris Arterton, here with us tonight. So thank you for creating the school, having the vision to bring it to Washington, and ensuring that we had such stalwart support of board members like Brian O'Dwyer, who named this lecture series in honor of his father, who was a New York City councilman and also became president of the council. It is really a testament to what we are about, and what that means is dedicating your life and thinking about the commitment you bring to the world of politics and public service. As a political scientist, I say often that politics is defined as the process by which we resolve conflict nonviolently. It is why, as a political scientist, we usually say that when politics fail, war ensues. So that is something to think deeply about in this time when politics as a word is thought of as something horrible. It's almost branded as though that means corruption and sort of discord. And why we're really here tonight is to have a conversation about what it means for families who see politics in one way or another and the public service that attends it as the family business, that it is something that children grow up with, it is something that is discussed at the dinner table, it is known and a part of your life in your earliest memories. And I think this is where this lecture tonight was so appropriate to have this conversation, because Brian O'Dwyer, who is here with us tonight, we're very privileged to have him here. He's an attorney in New York, and he's going to take a few moments to speak a little bit about his father. But before he does that, let me just tell you a little bit about him. He has spent his life working as an attorney, working on issues of immigration rights and labor relations. He's done commercial litigation. He's served as a counsel to the Department of Community Affairs of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. In fact, he's even been cited on behalf of the people of Puerto Rico, as well as the governor, for his efforts with them. He has served as counsel to the Benefit Fund of the Newspaper Guild, so helping to ensure that newspapers have their ability to print and be there with the truth when we need it. He has also served on many, many boards and given his time and energy to a variety of different projects. He's worked with the Teamsters, with the New York District Council of Carpenters, with SEIU. He's also served on the board of the Charles Lawrence Keith and Clara Miller Foundation, and he was appointed on the President's Commission on White House Fellowships by President Clinton. And he was awarded the Director's Citation for exemplary public service. So he himself is somebody who exemplifies what it means to commit to politics and public service, to give your life to sacrificing to try to make our world a little bit better. And that's something that I think our students do. And I can say that I'm delighted to also say he's an alumnus of GW and represents very much the best of the traditions that go with this university. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Brian to speak a little bit about his father, Paul.
Thank you. I was reminded, I was talking to the provost just here, I'm celebrating over 50 years of being here as an undergraduate. And in the days when Larry Lane and I were undergraduates at George Washington, there were two majors. Either you were a political science major or you weren't. Now things have changed, although I don't know if that's for the better, being the way it is. I'm delighted to be here tonight, particularly given the topic at hand and the people who are speaking on it. If you let me have a little idea of what this means to me, one of the great parts of pride that my father had was watching and helping Bobby Kennedy becoming senator of New York and working in that campaign and being part of that work, and with John Kennedy working on putting in Medicare for all. He was an extraordinary man. His political accomplishments really were waned in comparison to his work on behalf of the underdog and the people who were powerless in New York and the United States. 1948, he brought the first fair housing case in the United States. He brought the first case involving voting rights for Spanish-speaking people that went to the Supreme Court. He was always committed to civil rights. One of the great memories that I have was marching with him in Mississippi to bring about the integration of the Mississippi Law School with James Meredith. There was not a day that went by that he did not get up in the morning and decide that he must do good for that day. And it is his spirit that this lecture series was founded with these two extraordinary people you have here today. That spirit of pride, of accomplishment, and an ability to look to the common weal on a daily basis. Again, that politics is not a dirty word, but is an example of how we use the political system to make people's lives better. So I am delighted to be here tonight. I thank Lara and I thank GW for a number of things. Among that is, as an undergraduate, giving me the capacity to dream, and as a graduate, giving me the tools to fulfill those dreams. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. That was wonderful. And before I introduce our speakers, I just want to pause for a moment and say thank you as well to my extraordinary staff who managed to bring this all together and work with the university to do this. They have been tireless in their efforts. For those of you who are not aware, we are live streaming tonight, so this is going out all over the airwaves, so to speak, and will be able to be heard in perpetuity, which is just wonderful. And we've been working very hard on this conference, and so I really just thank them for all the work that they did. It's been a tremendous effort, and I'm really excited about the next day and a half that we have. So, with that, let me tell you about our fantastic panelists who are here for a dialogue. We have former Representative Connie Mack, the fourth. He served as representative for Florida's 14th Congressional District from 2005 to 2013. He worked a great deal on the Committee on Foreign Affairs and served as the chairman of the Subcommittee on the Western Hemisphere and the Budget, Oversight and Government Reform, Transportation and Infrastructure. He is somebody who very much dedicated himself to making sure that democracy stayed strong in the world, not just sort of in theory. He is somebody who really committed himself toward trying to ensure that Venezuela didn't go the way that Venezuela did, and he worked very hard against that. And this is where I think one of the things that I hope we'll talk about tonight is that politics isn't just a result, it is a process. And what that means is even when you lose, you still wake up and commit yourself to the game. You still get up every day and say, well, it didn't go my way today, but it might go my way tomorrow, and I'm going to keep doing that work. And I think that's something that is sorely missed today, and I hope it is something that we will get to tonight. Representative Mack currently serves as the founder and CEO of two lobbying firms, Liberty International Group and MACK Strategies. He's also the principal at Black Diamond Strategies. I thought this was very interesting in his bio, and it speaks a lot to what is, I think, also lacking in our world today, which is somebody of experience and depth. He says he provides experience to a wide variety of clients, and he has deep conservative ties, bicameral relationships, and extensive foreign affairs experience. And he has a strong bipartisan network of policymakers upon which he can reach out to. That tells you that he's somebody who actually did politics right, because he has the experience to show that he did it well. And I think it's also true that you may have seen him on many media outlets. He has been a frequent commentator on all of your favorite cable channels. And before serving in the House, he did serve in the Florida House of Representatives, and he is from Florida and a graduate of the University of Florida. So please, Representative Mack, come join us on stage. Thank you. So then we have our Lieutenant Governor of Maryland, our former Lieutenant Governor, Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, who we're also very proud to say is a GW parent. Her daughter is currently attending the medical school at the moment and is set to graduate in about a year. So we're excited to have her here tonight. Go Colonials. And Kathleen Kennedy Townsend has quite a distinguished experience and track record herself. She, for the last decade, has been working in the private sector. She's been serving as the managing director at the Rock Creek Group, leading a respected global investment and advisory firm. She provides investors with solutions to achieve their return and risk objectives. And I would say that that's not too easy in today's world. Political risk is one of the hardest, most challenging areas to actually weigh in with an opinion upon. She's also the founder of the Center of Research Initiatives at Georgetown University, and she has served as a professor there. She was appointed the chair of the governor's Retirement Security Task Force for the state of Maryland, and obviously you may remember when she was the state of Maryland's first lieutenant governor. She served from 1995 to 2001, and she was in charge of a multi-million-dollar budget and saw the oversight of all of the cabinet departments, including economic development and transportation, state police, public safety, correction, and juvenile justice. Prior to being Lieutenant Governor of Maryland, she served as the Deputy Assistant Attorney General of the United States. And in that role, she helped to bring community policing to the forefront. There was 100,000 community police officers who were put into the community during, if I recall, that was the Clinton administration, right? No? So, okay. Look at that. So this is why we love having experienced politicians around. They just get to the heart of the issue. So with that, I'm going to let each of you talk a little bit about yourselves, and a little bit about your thoughts about generations. Then we'll get to some questions. From here.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I'm really glad to be with you tonight. I think George Washington is an extraordinary university, and I've seen it up close, as you heard, with my daughter, who loves it. I think it's the best medical school, so I'm just delighted that she gets to come here. So I just wanted to tell you that. I'm also glad that she's the first doctor in our family. Sort of out of the ordinary. Most of us do politics or some sort of other things along those lines, so good for her. So I think the question is that you asked is, generations of families in politics. And you may have heard my family has been in politics. And, and it started a long time ago. It started, my grandfather, Honey Fitz, was the first American Irish-born mayor of Boston. There have been a lot of other Irish ethnic Boston mayors, but he was the first. And on my others, and Joseph P. Kennedy, who was my grandfather's father, was a ward healer. Have you ever heard of ward healers? No, you don't even know what I'm talking about. Okay, so a ward healer is somebody who gets out the vote and counts the vote. And that was very important for the Irish because just to think about it, Boston was largely controlled by Protestants. You've heard of them. And they did not like all these Irish Catholic immigrants coming to Boston at all. In fact, there were signs. And my grandmother, I could go on and on. When I was growing up, I'm going to be brief about my grandmother. We'll talk about this. But when I was growing up, my grandmother, Rose Kennedy, used to come and visit us, and she would then, we had to send her letters to thank her for her visit, and then she would send them back corrected, redlined, spelling, diction, grammar. So I didn't have a really warm feeling about my grandmother growing up. And then about the age of, when she turned about 75, she started to slow down a little bit and stop traveling around the world. And so she would take these 2-mile walks every morning and every afternoon, and she'd recruit her grandchildren to go walking with her. And I was the oldest. I still am. Some boys pointed out. And what was interesting, and why I'm telling you this, is how, you know, she had, as you can imagine, you could argue, very successful children. But she never talked about her children. She always talked about herself.
That's funny.
I don't sound too nice, do I? But what was interesting about talking about herself was how she was so focused about how it was like to grow up in Boston, even when her father was the mayor, and there were still signs that said, "Help wanted, no Irish need apply." And she was still so angry about that. And she told, I'll tell you just 2 stories about her, because I think it helps to understand the shape of our family's commitment, 1 to politics and 2 to the underdog. She described how there was this, the Abbey Players, do you know there's a theater in Dublin? I'm just trying to find out what my audience knows. There's this very famous, theater in in Dublin called the Abbey Abbey, and they were going to come to Boston, and she was so happy because she described how this was going to prove that the Irish were smart and that they could write plays and that they could act, and she thought that would show the WASP, the Protestant power structure in Boston, how great the Irish were. And then, she said, and then they came over, and the play they showed was William Synge's Playboy of the Western World, which showed off the Irish as drunk, womenizing louts. And okay, do you understand? She's telling me this 65 years after it happened. She's still bitter at the Abbey Players for showing that. But she's also bitter that she was not well accepted, even political, you know, although her father did well politically, she wasn't accepted into the right circles in Boston. And that really helped me understand why I think when I was growing up and my uncle was running for the president, thank you, Paul O'Dwyer, for helping him, that there was a real sense that number one, there was still, as you know, a lot of prejudice against the Irish. In fact, I know I shouldn't say this, but I am. Billy Graham, who everybody's saying how wonderful he is, you know where I'm going. Billy Graham and Norman Vincent Peale, have you ever heard of Norman Vincent Peale? The Power of Positive Thinking. As you can see, as the oldest of 11 kids, I'm always asking the younger kids if they know what's going on. Nora wrote a letter in 1960 saying we should not have John Kennedy be elected president because we shouldn't have a Catholic person elected because the Pope will control what goes on in the White House. You laugh, but that's the great minister that everybody's praising. I think he eventually, regretted that letter. But that was the view of many people in 1960. And so I'm going to end it now because, as you can see, it's somebody else's turn. But
this is really interesting. Keep going.
But you can see how important it was for an ethnic group to gain power because there was so much feelings about them. And I think, and I'll just end it there and we can ask other, go on, that it taught them what it was like to be outsiders. So that when they became president, he had his foot in both courts. Obviously, when you win the presidency, you have power, no question, very strong, terrific. But because of his background, he also understood what it means to be left out and left behind and discriminated against. And I think that dual understanding helped to shape my uncle's administration and our family's view of politics.
That's fascinating. Thank you. So, Representative Mack?
Maybe I should have went first. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for the invitation to GW and all of the staff, the wait staff, everyone. A lot goes into these, and so my hat's off to you, and thank you so much for the invitation. And it's a pleasure to be with you. And
Good to be with you.
I have a feeling we're going to have a lot of fun tonight, and also to all of the students and faculty. One of the things that I'm happy to see is that there are people in a room who still want to pursue politics, and we'll get into that a little bit as we go. But so thank you all for being here. You know, it's interesting because when this first was brought to me, and I looked at it and I said, well, I'm not sure we're a dynasty. I mean, I'm not sure that, I don't know that that is something that we think about or recognize, but I do recognize that there's obviously my father being in the Senate. What you may not know is my great-grandfather and my great-grandfather and my great-great-grandfather were also, one was in the Senate, Morris Shepherd from Texas.
Cool.
Boy, if we get into policy things here, it could get a little tricky. He was the author of Prohibition, and
That was totally anti-Irish.
Yes, it was.
and then there's his father was a member of Congress. So we've got this long history, and then my great-grandfather on my father's side was the owner-manager of the Philadelphia Athletics from 1901 to 1954.
Great.
And there's sports, politics, absolutely. There's a nexus there. There's a lot of things that are common. Our real name, by the way, is Cornelius McGillicuddy. So it just gets trickier and trickier. So I grew up in a place called Cape Coral, Florida, and it's a wonderful place. Forget that I said it, because we don't want everybody coming. Actually, I take that back. They do want everybody coming down. But it's a barrier island. It's a beautiful place. There's as a kid growing up, there was so much to do in nature and outside, and but politics wasn't part of necessarily my sort of day-to-day growing up. It wasn't until 8th grade that my father decided to run for the Congress that, for me, I really started to pay attention, obviously. Mm-hmm. Before that, what I saw and learned from my parents was the idea of community, giving back, being part of that. Cape Coral has grown a lot, but back then it was dirt roads, and so we laid the sod at the first baseball field, the first football field. Dad was instrumental in building the first hospital. So this is, that was something that I grew up with. That every weekend, if I wasn't able to get away fast enough and go out on the boat fishing, I was helping my mother and father in the community. And through those times and listening to my grandmother, whose side of the family the Shepherds are on, there was always this idea of service. Mm-hmm. That's what you did. When you're a kid growing up, you don't really think about it, but as you get older, you realize how important it is. And you're thankful for the lessons that you learned. And I'm looking forward to getting into some of the questions. But I'll tell you this, there were, for me, and I think for many people who have grown up around politics, it's like anything else. If you don't know it, it can be a scary thing. sort of living through it, some of those things that are scary, you understand a little bit more. You sort of see how it works. And I remember my father during his first race. Nothing has really changed. It was a primary, and people said the darndest thing about my dad. Not my dad. And it really was a lesson that it could be tough. But my father taught me that doing it and being a part of and giving back was worth all of those challenges that you face during your time in politics. And I hope to get into more of that as we go. So I'll leave you with this. There was one quote that I had in my room growing up. And I think it comes more, frankly, on the baseball side. But it was this idea that you don't have to be the strongest or the fastest. Sooner or later, those who win are those who think they can. And that changed everything for me. So, thank you.
Thank you.
That's lovely.
So thank you for sharing a bit about your background. I think some of the questions that I was curious about really do have to do with what we know about political socialization, actually as a profession. So in political science, we often talk about how important family is for young people to really get to a place of understanding politics. And in fact, your partisan identification tends to follow your parents, unless you have parents where, one parent's one party and the other parent's another party. But this idea that your family really does matter and give you a sense of a worldview, that is usually until young people go to college. College is a huge demarcation for students. But it's also true that most students don't really get kind of a sense of what politics means until they start grappling with some of the things that come at college age, which is you start to pay taxes, you start to work, you start to have a sense that there are other governing bodies other than just your parents that are affecting your life. So I'm curious, about sort of the first campaigns you worked on and how was the sort of acculturation into, strategic thinking. Because I do think one of the other things that's very fascinating about politics is that it does teach you at a very basic level, and I think this is true of sports too, a sense of the game, a sense about what it means to be strategic versus tactical, to start thinking about sort of, are you playing a long game, are you playing a short game? Those are not necessarily just easy thoughts. So, at what point when you were stuffing envelopes, did you start to decide you wanted to tell the media consultant something?
Well, I was 8.
Yeah.
So, and I wasn't just stuffing envelopes, I worked the auto pen.
I don't know that, yeah.
They don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, no. It was really a great machine.
An auto pen is what they used to do to get the signatures. People would write Senator Kennedy a letter, and somebody had to, he didn't sign every letter that went back. There was something called an auto pen, and that's what I did at the age of 8.
It was a really neat machine. I mean, if you think about it, what you do now, it's just on the computer. But to get the signature, you had to put your arm in this contraption, and it cut this template out as you signed your name.
Thank you.
And it was this huge machine. I mean, it was quite impressive.
Thank you.
So you felt very powerful, I imagine,
I
signing this name.
I did powerful. Yes, I felt powerful. So that's one of the things I did in the 60 campaign. I also went to a number of, events. My family, again, believed that it was very important to reach out to women. And so they had what is called a series of tea parties in which they would specially say, we want to to have women come to these events. And I think it's really one of the first of any campaigns that specifically targeted women as part of the effort to win the campaign. In fact, they used this same tactic in 1952 when my uncle, President John Kennedy, ran against Henry Cabot Lodge. And at the end of the campaign, it was a Republican sweep that year, 1952. Senator Lodge was an incumbent senator. His father had been the senator, and Jack Kennedy was, nobody could believe that he could possibly win. In fact, the governor, who was a Democrat, wouldn't have anything to do with him because he thought he would be brought down by association with Jack Kennedy. But at the end, it was these tea parties, these women, that won. And Henry Cabot Lodge said he was drowned in tea. So it was sort of perfect. And I think it was, and I just want to say something about bipartisanship after that. After that happened, you could imagine that they would not get along. But because the politics was at a different time, every Saturday, the Kennedys and the Lodges would play touch football. And we had a trophy. And you could see which Saturday we won because every Saturday it was lined. The Kennedys won one Saturday, most Saturdays. I'm really making that up. But, and the Lodges would win. But if you can imagine defeating them in 1952, but all through the 50s, every Saturday. And we were living in Georgetown. We'd have
That's great.
the football games right there.
That's
So for me, I go back to, I'm in 8th grade. I don't know, I'm sure like everyone else, you're in 8th grade, you're still just trying to figure out what all kinds of things mean and what the next step is, and so excited about going to high school. And I think at the time, the biggest thing I wanted to be able to do was drive it to high school, So I wasn't necessarily paying a lot of attention. But what I did notice is, every, the campaign headquarters was our house. And there were always people coming and going. But there was this one guy that came, and when he came, it got serious. And he was a political consultant. And so, polling and starting to see these things. Now, I didn't sit at the table and, wanting to pick through the numbers with them, but I would hear, and I would sit sometimes, and they would ask me, what do you think? Not so much, they wanted to get a feeling from someone who wasn't really paying attention like they were about how others might feel. And they did this with my mother, too. She was at the table, but you could always count on my mother to give you one of those answers that, the consultants and the pros just would miss. And, it was like, for her, it was so simple and so easy to see. So I'd say, for me, it went from sort of on the outside to wanting to be part of knocking on doors. I thought that was fun. People getting together and knocking on doors, and because there was always something crazy that happened, and so most people don't like it when you just knock on their door. So they open it, and you try to get your name, they slam it, and there's dogs barking, and so it was all it was like something's always interesting with this. So that was my sort of the beginning for me. There was not a lot for me at that age on policy or where how I might feel about different issues, but it was very much a part of. I can remember these debates, and the political consultant would say, "This is what people are thinking," and his little control group would say, "Well, this is what we're," and my father would, when they'd get into it, he'd slam his hand on the table and says, "What's the right thing to do?" we need a little more of that these days.
That's true.
Excuse me, sorry. It was a powerful moment for me to be around this sort of power structure and to have someone say, what's the right thing to do? So that was the beginning for me of going, this is important. It's something that we all need to participate in. I remember my father giving a speech and saying that he would, this is when he, after he retired, or his announcement, he said that politics was an honorable profession where men and women, good men and women, need to get involved and would encourage anybody to participate. And I was standing behind him on the courthouse steps, and I was like, I wonder if that, that means me. And I can tell you the story about that later. But so that was my introduction to something more than just knocking on the doors, but being around and watching the pros, and then watching the candidate and my mother sort of say, what's the right thing to do?
Yeah, I mean, and that's a really sort of perfect lead-in to my next question is, when did you get bitten by the bug? Because I do think that for most people who, serve in office, run for office, spend their life around politics, there is a side where we all joke about being political junkies, but there is something true about that politics is sort of limitlessly fascinating, even when it's not personally affecting you. You sort of want to follow the stories and understand what's happening and know sort of what tides are turning. So I'm curious, when did you get kind of bitten by the bug and decide, all right, it's time for me to step in. It's time for me to do something.
Well, if you'll just let me.
Go ahead.
So I did not like it. I didn't like the way, all the attacking and all of the, it wasn't, most of my younger life, people would say, oh, you're going to run. No. That, I would look for my own way to try to participate and give back, but I wasn't, I'm sure many of you here, when you think about politics, you have a vision and you have an idea. Obviously, you're part of the program, and so you have an interest. But everyone gets to the point where they say something like, "Oh, but with my background," or something, like that. And so to watch some of this unfold was not something I was really interested in. But then when I was at the University of Florida, and two quick stories. I had a teacher, professor in my journalism school who, there was 300 kids, and the first day she decided to call roll, and she's going through, and she gets to Cornelius McGillicuddy. And, I do one of these, and she goes, by chance, is your name, do you go by Connie Mack? And I said, yes. And she said, is your father in politics? And I said, yes. And she said to the class, ladies and gentlemen, his father is the reason why some of your friends aren't here today. Really nasty, right?
Why?
And so that was the first time that I went from, no, I don't want to sort of challenge, like, okay.
Let's go.
Let's go. It's a combat sport sometimes. And it was the first time that I went, because I didn't know the answer why. And I
didn't.
No, and I was like, I need to, so it became a challenge in a lot of ways. And another time, again, on campus, I got sort of cornered by some kids that didn't like something my father was doing, and they let me know. I said, well, I'm sorry you don't agree, but I just really didn't want to get into any sort of conflict over this. But that is when, for me, it all started to, I really started thinking about different policies, politics, the challenges that I saw my father facing, and knowing what others' families are facing, the challenges that are there for the candidate, by the way, most of the time it's the easiest. It's the family that it's most difficult on, because you're not part of it and you just get to hear it all. So that for me is what really triggered the thought process of maybe one day I'll do this.
What about you?
Well, I'm glad you did.
Thank you.
So I'd say I grew up in a different situation, which is early on, my father was attacked. I mean, the first words I often heard about my father was that he was ruthless. So I was accustomed to, from the age of 2 or 3, to know that if you're going to be involved in politics, you're going to be attacked. And in fact, when I went to elementary school, good to say, and my mother actually wanted me to know a lot about what my father was doing. So rather than take me to the playground where other kids used to go, swing on the swings, slide down the slide, she'd take us to the Senate Racket Committee hearings, where I think my first words were, "I refuse to answer that question." So, and I tell you this because when I was in elementary school at Our Lady of Victory, it's MacArthur Boulevard nearby, where at that time you had 1 nun and 45 kids. But you had the threat of hell, which turned out to be very effective.
And a ruler.
They didn't need the rulers. Hell did it by itself. But the mob, who didn't like my father, then threatened to throw acid in our eyes. And so, unlike the other kids in my 2nd and 3rd grade class who could leave the school, I couldn't until my mother came and picked us up. So I learned, I think, very early on, and this is obviously learned it in other ways too, that politics was tough, and that if you want to do something, it's just the same words, an honorable profession. And and that it was fun too. I mean, one of my favorite quotes from President Kennedy was, somebody said, when he was running for president, they said, "Why do you want to run for president?" And he said, "That's where the action is." And I think that's a wonderful way of thinking of it, because he was saying he wants to be in the center of action. He wanted to be involved and engaged. There's the great quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes: "You want to be involved in the actions of the passions of your time to say that you have lived." And I think that's very much what politics is, if you see it that way. And when people say, well, isn't it tough to be criticized? I think, obviously, I grew up with being criticized, so that was nothing new. But I also think we send people to war who are putting their lives on the line, and if somebody's going to criticize you, you're asking other people to fight for you. And I just think it's such a weak trying to say, well, I don't want to be criticized. I mean, get over it. It's really what I think. So that's number one. I would say one difference is when I was growing up, it was very hard for me to figure out what to do, because it was all the guys that did politics. Mm-hmm. And then my mother had 11 kids, which also seemed rather intimidating. So it wasn't... I think doing politics is clearly easier than having 11 kids.
I'll be politics.
So I say that in that I really wasn't until I was probably in my 30s. I ran for office much later, because it was really the women's movement that opened me to the fact that I could run. And as you know, I came from a political family, so you would think that's where I got the idea. And I certainly absorbed a lot of the lessons, as you've heard me say, but it never occurred to me that I could run, because the culture around me was women didn't run for office. Women raised children, or women fundraised, which my mother did, or did a charity events. And I think that's important to know, because it says even if you come from the most incredible family, if the culture around you is different, that can stop you. And which means I'm very well aware of what a culture can do to open people to what they can accomplish or dampen what they can believe in themselves. Because it was really, if it hadn't been for the women's movement, and I say, you know, my Aunt Eunice, who started Special Olympics in her backyard, it's obviously grown, she would have been great, but it would never occur to her when and my grandmother, Rose Kennedy, clearly loved politics more than anything, but she couldn't do it. I mean, she was still studying her French and German records till she was 94, because she said, you don't know who will come visit, you'll have to speak to them. And when you remember I was describing those walks, those 2-mile walks, well, she used to attach famous quotations to her sweater. So she said, you never know if somebody will ask to give you a speech and you'll have to say something appropriate.
So she'd pull off her quote.
So she'd pull out, she'd memorize the quotes. If you could tell, she was memorizing them if our conversation lagged. So she was prepared.
It's extraordinary. That's really wonderful. I mean, I will tell you, I agree with you about the fight. I often say to our students that, you know, the last safe space I was in was my playpen. And so I really do believe that part of being in the game is you do have to be comfortable with the sort of tug and pull of politics. I mean, what this conference is really all about is about trying to move things from being sort of the constant, well, in football parlance at this point, what they call, you know, intentional targeting, right, which gets you ejected from the game. We need to get back to at least some understandings that legitimate criticism is different than the sort of constant blame shifting and enemy making that is sort of so much of our part of today. So I think the other question I want to ask you, obviously, you each ran and you won and you served. What was it like once you were serving? Was it what you envisioned? Was it what you had thought? Did you think to yourself, oh my gosh, why did I do this?
Yeah, so I first ran, I think it's a pretty typical story, sort of watching the news and yelling at it.
Yep.
What are they doing? You know, we need someone up there. We need some, you know, that kind of stuff. And I'm sure everybody here has done that. And so I was challenged and decided to run for the state legislature. This was, my father had retired in 2000, and he gave that speech that I told you about. So I was, you know, mentally preparing myself, but I had never mentioned to my parents that I'm interested in this. And it's funny because I went and sat with them and said, I'm considering running. My dad said, don't do it. And my mom said, go for it. Right? So, and we sat around a room with a couple other folks for a complete day, and all what we did was talk about my life. Every little thing that we thought or somebody could make an issue of. You know, that's hard to do with your parents. What did I tell them about that thing? Oh gosh, this is, you know, I don't know. And you know, I didn't live my life up to that point thinking I'm going to run for office, so I need to be this perfect whatever that is. I had enough of the skeletons that, because my father was the senator, weren't quite skeletons. But that was the sort of the first thing we did, and we talked about how that it's you know, it's like a play, and everybody has a different character in the play. And in a play, you obviously have villains. And so thinking of it that way helped sort of the idea that, okay, you're going to get attacked. It's going to be tough. If you could always sort of envision it, well, that's who they are in this play, and I am who I am. Quickly, I learned that watching the attacks on my father, how he handled them, absolutely played a hand in how I dealt with those things. And if he were sitting here, he would probably tell you, my mother certainly would tell you, the reason he didn't want me to run is he didn't want me to go through the things that he went through. The reason my mother wanted me to run is, and she said it to him, she goes, look, you're a wimp. Your son is much tougher than you are. And
Thanks for sharing.
yeah. So that was,
So interesting.
and we took that day of going through all of those things and then began to put a plan together. And from the first moment that we announced, it was everything that you thought it would be. There were some of the greatest moments were, announcing your candidacy with your family with you. And then you're done and you step down and now you're talking to the press and that moment went and you're in a new one, which is quite different because they weren't interested in asking the questions that I wanted to answer and how to deal with all of that.
Press is that way.
And it is a process. And you use game. For some reason, I have a hard time calling it a game, but it is a process, and you have to understand how, if you are the candidate in the play, that everything you do, even though it might not make sense from others looking at it, there is a reason why you're doing it, and it is get a message out. You're always trying to collect more resources with your people, and that all began with that one sort of conversation. And for me, that was I was in my early 30s, and it was one of the greatest times of my life coming to that decision and making the announcement and running in that campaign and winning.
And so let me just follow up. So with serving, how did serving seem to be all that you imagined when you were actually in office in Florida, when you were in office in Washington?
Yeah, it was more than what I thought it would be, because I expected to get there and it to be very, very partisan, where everybody sort of was angry with each other, and what I found was completely the opposite. And that was true, by the way, in the legislature and here. Yes, absolutely, the partisanship was there, the big fights were had, but if you allowed those things to sort of not get caught up in those things, the relationships that you build with people from your party or the other party, what you learn from people and their experiences, if you sort of allow yourself to listen, you actually can pick up and you might learn something that has an impact on the way you think about. So for me, it was a lot more than what I expected. I expected a much more sort of, we're gonna scream at each other and that's it. But what I saw was good people who passionately believed in something. And if I may not have had the same belief, but they were good people, and I still believe that that's true today. There's obviously today is even different from when I left the Congress, but those people still exist. They're good people who want to do the right thing, but have a different way of maybe solving problems. And there are people in the Congress and certainly in the state legislature who aren't out there getting the headlines, aren't on TV every day going back and forth, but who are actually sitting down saying, let's try to come to a solution, let's work on these things. And I wish everybody got to see more of that. So for me, it was better than I expected, and also the sort of pride you get when you can help people in your district, whether it's everything from for me in the state legislature, we dealt with an issue early on dealing with a family from Cuba who one member was in the United States. A father and child were still in Cuba, and being able to be a part of that and help bring the family together. Those are the things that you don't necessarily get to see all the time, but are so rewarding about being in the job.
Kathleen. Oh, I got to be lieutenant governor, and it's a blast. I had the best time. And it was a really great time to be in state government because it was in the 90s and early 2000s, and twice when we had $1 billion surpluses. And we were able to cut taxes by 10%. So you can see it was really fun. And I got to do a lot, as you say, to make a difference, which I would love to spend the next 2 hours describing to you. But I'm just going to describe one of them because I think I loved it so much. So one of the issues, of course, is crime. And we had high crime times in the 95, 96. As you know, crime has come down a lot. But I said I was in charge of our anti-crime efforts, state police, juvenile justice, Department of Corrections, and about $100 million budget from the federal government that was allowed to us to give to local law enforcement. So I said, well, why don't we, rather than just give out grants the way that it had done before, let's focus our effort on the high crime area. I can't remember the statistics at the moment, but there's something like 85% of the crime occurs in 3% of the neighborhoods. And 75% of the crime is committed by the same 10% of the people. Do you get the point? Mm-hmm. So why are we just spreading our money around? Why don't we focus on the people and the places where the crime occurs and by the people and they usually live in those neighborhoods, right? Okay. So we did that, and we spent a year figuring out what are the strategies you could use that you could employ to reduce crime. And we came up with 6 strategies, taking one of them, which is taking parole and probation officers and putting them in the community policing, making sure that there were children in the community. If there weren't children, it was very hard to get people interested in reducing crime. They had to work with the police. And so if there wasn't that, it wouldn't work. And we had to find a community leader. You may have children, you may have the police, parole and probation, but if you didn't have a community leader that the police could work with, the police couldn't build the trust. So we had these 6 criteria, and we said, you're going to get some money. We chose 35 what we called hot spots, and that was difficult because some people don't want to be called a hot spot. It sounded like it was a high crime area, which it was. But we thought, we're going to be honest about what's going on. And then we set a goal, which often doesn't happen in government anywhere. And we said, we want to reduce crime by 35% in the next 3 years. Obviously, we did. Otherwise, I wouldn't tell you the story. And and then we doubled the number too, and then we also set the goal, and we also reduced crime. So, and I can tell you lots of successes, which of course I'm not going to because you would hear you forever. But the point is, you can really make a difference if you want to make a difference. And I know some people like to go to Congress. A lot of my family has gone to Congress, but being an executive is really fun. Respond. Because you can appoint people. You can direct money to certain places. So you can say we're going to do after-school activities, or you're going to reduce drug abuse by really focusing your efforts, or reduce crime you're going to keep kids in school. There is change. I'll tell you one other thing I did, which I loved. Usually in politics, and I believe in this very strongly, you do what your constituents want you to do. But I had this passion for dentistry.
Didn't see that coming.
So I got us to put $70 million in the budget for dental care because, and I'm going to end on this because you're going to die if I keep talking, but if lots of kids don't have access to dental care, and if you don't have good dental care, your teeth don't grow in correctly, you get cavities, you don't learn to eat well, so you don't get a good diet on one hand, you don't learn to speak well, so you don't get a good job, and you spend the rest of your life going like this to your face because you're embarrassed that your teeth don't look good. And so it hurts you both physically and mentally and psychologically and for your job. Okay, nobody asked me to do that, but I got that, and so on my own, we put a lot of money for dental care.
That's fantastic.
So funny.
It's so true, though.
Huh?
It's so true.
Totally true.
Yeah.
Absolutely true, and it's something that a lot of people don't think about, and I think it's fantastic. So what I want to do for sort of our last 10, 15 minutes or so is open it up to some questions so that it's not just me peppering you with thoughts.
Where did you think I was going to go?
I don't know.
So any questions from the audience? We have two wonderful people helping with the...
Hey, how you doing? My name is Liam. I'm currently in GSPM, but I'm also an undergraduate student. And something I wanted to ask both of the panelists was, it seems that you both have like kind of a bipartisan embrace. I mean, for one, you're sitting next to each other. That's more than I've seen in some circumstances. But I wanted to know, what is the best approach in circumstances, especially in your own maybe college experiences, you can reflect on, that you can best sit down with those people you really disagree with and still be cordial and still have productive conversations? Because I find that, I know, of course, this is not going to happen with everybody, but there's a lot of situations that I find that very hard in undergrad, especially when somebody conflates your political beliefs with something that they think, i.e. a Republican is bigotrous or a Democrat is socialist. So what are some strategies you think could best, help increase that cordiality?
Good question.
I will tell you one story about what I did. So when I was running for, and then I'll tell you a few strategies. So when I was running for lieutenant governor, there was a guy called Robert Emmet, who had started the American Spectator, which was a very far-right magazine, and attacked Bill Clinton a lot. But I had gone to dinner with him a number of times, and he's Irish, so we shared that. And so, you find what you can share. We also shared a belief in human rights, because the far right and the far left often agreed that human rights should be part of our foreign policy. So that was interesting. So we talked about that a lot, and we shared that a lot. And so when I was running for lieutenant governor, he sent me money. My campaign was furious that we were getting money from this right-wing ideologue, and his friends were furious that he had given money to me. So, I mean, I'm accustomed to trying to reach across and find places of common ground. There's a wonderful quote from Socrates that said, we get to know one another best, not by talking with each other across the table, but by working shoulder to shoulder on common problems. So my instinct in colleges, and this is really what I did in Maryland before I became lieutenant governor, is require all kids to do community service. Because I thought that when young people work together and stop thinking about ideology, socialist, what does that mean? but instead just have to figure out how to clean up the stream or teach a child to read. Then they're focused on something they can solve together, and then they realize the strength that the other person has. And I think I would go further and say that I think that there was a reason why there was a greater comity, C-O-M-I-T-Y, in Congress right after World War II, because so many of the people, like John Kennedy or my father, had fought with as did the Republicans, like Nixon. I mean, in other words, if you had shared that you were in the fight together and you'd seen your colleagues die, you were not going to be so self-righteous about ideas, because what was most important is what you had shared. And what happens if you don't have shared experiences, then we just talk to each other, and talking can be very divisive.
I think it starts with within yourself. So if you have to be in a place where you're open and want to have a discussion with someone that may not agree with you, and it takes a lot of patience. It takes restraint sometimes, because all of us also want to prove that we're right, and so there's this conflict. For me, when I got to the state legislature and then to the Congress, I made it a point to go meet with not just my Republican colleagues, but my Democrat colleagues. So started in the state of Florida. Many of us served in the legislature together. So, we had a relationship, but tried to build on that relationship that could be beyond the policy argument. Let me just finish there, and then I'll come back to being in school. So my father and I talk about this a lot, and when he was in, Tip O'Neill was the speaker, and there were, you go back and watch or read, and it was tough. I mean, they went at it. Everybody, it was a brutal debates that were very personal a lot of times, but they all found ways to come together later. And, they would go have meals together, or go down and have a drink together. We're in college, but it's true. And families got to know each other. So it wasn't until after 94 that this idea that, before 94, a lot of the families would stay up here. So you got to know each other's, it's the same way you were talking about fighting in war. When your children play together, when you socialize Codels, when members go on Codels, it's actually a very good thing, even though the public now sort of frowns upon it, but it gives people a chance to get to know each other. So for students, I think you want to do the same type of thing. First, you got to ask yourself, are you willing to listen to the other side, and understand that when you do that, they're going to say things that offend you. They're going to say that you're going to be passionate about, and you might want to fight back, but you have to sort of control that urge for the benefit of having a conversation and getting to know each other. And you'll see that they'll respond in a way that is not as argumentative or immediately into a fight. It's tough to do, but I think more that we look at ourselves first, and then figure out, are you going to force that person to believe in your position, or are you open to having a debate or a conversation, difference of opinion, and to walk away saying it's okay that we have a difference of opinion. So I don't know if that really helps. It's hard to do. I don't know that I could have done that when I was in college.
I will say there was a suggestion at one point to have members of Congress from each side of the aisle work together to build IKEA furniture. And there was the belief that that might really forge some bipartisan trust, because if you can build that furniture together, you're going to go a long way.
It's true. I know it's true, though. The more they get to know each other, the better it is.
So I would say invite all your friends over to your dorm room, order something from IKEA and try to figure out how to do it. Let's take another question, and then I know we're running short on time.
Thank you. So the point of this entire session is about reimagining disruption, if I'm recalling correctly. And I'm just very interested about how people from political dynasties are part of this disruption. I believe, Ms. Kennedy, your brother is currently running in my home state.
My brother what?
Your brother, I believe I tried to read the family tree to figure out. There's a Kennedy running right now
Really?
in Illinois.
Yeah, there was, when I ran, there were 5 members of our family were running, and we had a slogan, vote for the Kennedy nearest you.
That's great.
I like it.
But there is a Kennedy
glad you're
currently
laughing.
running in my home state of Illinois.
Oh, yes,
And I
you're
believe
right.
his
My
main
brother
brand-
is. You're my brother. He was born on my birthday.
Yeah. And Mr. Mack, a friend of mine sent me an image of your grandfather's name on a street sign back up in Massachusetts. So I'm just curious how you believe you could be disruptive agents being from this dynastic cycle when people who don't have your same family branding can try to involve in politics.
Well, you haven't been back to Illinois recently, but my brother is taking on the Democratic establishment.
I'm aware Pritzker
Big time.
has a lot of money.
What?
I'm aware Pritzker has a lot of money.
Yeah, he's already spent 15. Yeah. So. Yeah. So anyway, so and I would argue that it depends when you think where are you in this dynasty. The tradition, my family's tradition has been as being outsiders, right? That's what President Kennedy was, the first Irish Catholic president. My father was known for really being difficult.
Yes.
And I'll just give you an example. This was during the Vietnam, and there are many examples, just so you know, but an example that would maybe relate to students. During the Vietnam War, if you were a student, you got a student deferment. And he said to the students, well, do you think that's fair? People who can't afford college, people don't have your luck. They have to fight, and you get out of it. What's fair about that? And he said this at the University of Kansas when he was running in the Kansas primary to 10,000 kids at the University of Kansas. So that's a pretty disruptive thing to say. And he did a lot of things like that. And I would say that it depends on who you are, but if you come from a tradition of being a disruptor, which is, to tell you the truth, my family's tradition, I'll just give you this brief story, not about me, but about my mother. When I was in, again, Our Lady of Victory, my mother saw these horses that were she thought being starved, so she brought them back to our house, and then she was sued for horse stealing, which at that point was a hanging offense in the state of Virginia. So my father was the attorney general, and my mother was on trial for horse thief. So part of it is to learn to do both at once.
Good answer.
I don't know that. I think again, I'm not sure that I fully grasp the idea of the dynasty. Having said that, every time I get an opportunity when I go to the Hill, People tell me they're going to run. I always try to, well, let me step. I can be as partisan and as mean as anybody. So I'm not sitting here trying to pretend like I'm this, you know. But if you want to make the changes or disrupt things, it's, I sort of feel like that's what I did when I was in the Congress. So the sort of the fights or the issues that I got involved in were less about the ones that were Republican, Democrat, but it's where I felt the Republican Party had forgotten maybe what it meant to be a conservative or those types of things. And so that's how I would disrupt in the Congress. An example is when the Senate passed their legislation in Arizona, the Arizona Senate, basically allowing for police officers to pull over people just because the way they look, whatever. I felt like as a Republican that was not the right thing. We didn't believe in that. As you can imagine, being the only Republican to take that position, it disrupted a lot of things. Now being on the outside, I try to encourage my former colleagues to do the same thing. Don't let the political machine take over why you ran, what you believe in, even if it's not popular, that the reward has to be that you feel like you're doing the right thing, not, you know, this is the right political move. But that's not going to disrupt the entire system. But I think more people who may have served, who can go back and remind people of why they ran in the first place. For me, that's my little part.
And I'll just share with you why, as we're reimagining disruption, we actually wanted to have this conversation about dynasties. And it's partly because the conventional wisdom these days is that it's great if you know nothing about politics to serve in politics. There's actually no sort of profession that exists where inexperience is thought to be the best experience. And so part of why we're having this conversation is actually to try to help people rethink and reimagine what the future may be about. And part of that future, I would hope, is that having political experience, having political history, seeing other people who do it, learning about it, actually will end up contributing to a better political future than sort of everyone saying, I have no idea what I'm doing here, but this is what we do. And I'm running because isn't it great? I don't know anything. So I will tell you, part of this is to flip some of the script, some of the negative optics that have come about that talk about political dynasties or families where politics and public service is the family business, that's bad. This actually isn't bad. I mean, I think hearing tonight their stories about their lives and their experiences, I think what you see is a profound commitment to making the world a better place. And that's really what we should be encouraging in politics. So with that, we're going to end it there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.